Vatican Museums, in collaboration with TBA Group, present a film. Treasures of the Vatican, Art and Faith.
Vista dall'alto, la città del Vaticano sembra un'isola in mezzo alla vasta distesa della
From
città
far
di Roma,
away, the
di tre
Vatican
volte
City
più
looks
grande.
like an isle
Ma
surrounded by
all'interno
the
di
urban
questi
plain of
murali
Rome.
sono
But
concentrati
inside those
2000 anni
walls,
di
there's an
storia,
axis
di
joining the
arte,
heritage
da
of
cui
art,
nacquero i
faith, and
Musei
history.
Vaticani, la Basilica
The
di
Vatican
San
Museums,
Pietro, e
St. Peter's
incastonata fra i
Basilica,
due,
and
la
the
Cappella
Sistine
Sistina.
Chapel located between the two.
Da qui vediamo il Colle Vaticano.
From here we can see the Vatican Hill where history and art are linked. Every day, thousands of visitors come here to admire the majestic dome on St. Peter's Basilica and frescoes in the Sistine Chapel. Different on the outside, the two buildings tell the story of the beginning, of the origin of the papacy with St. Peter's tomb, which is 144 meters under the dome, and the origin of the world and man in the Book of Genesis by Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel. During the next hour, we're going to discover the history of papal collections, from ancient sculptures to Renaissance paintings to modern works. Why have so many works of art been gathered in such a small space? We are going to uncover the secrets of the fertility of the Vatican soil. In 1508, human genius and history met on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel due to the patronage of Pope Julius II and Michelangelo's brush. As a sculptor, Michelangelo comprehended painting differently from his contemporaries. His story of the Genesis starts from the separation of light from darkness. He did not paint a static God seated on a throne, but the Creator engaged dynamically in the work of creation. Abandoning the colors used in the past, Michelangelo draws upon a sensitivity of sculpture and focuses on describing the movements of God's body in the moment of creation. When God creates the sun, moon, and planets, the artist emphasizes the activity instead of the object. The sun loses a crimson-clad figure, which hovers and disappears in the space. Movement ceases when God looks at what he has done while preparing for the greatest act of creation, the creation of man. Adam is bright, radiant, different from the dark clay from which he was molded. He is passive, unlike God, who reaches over the abyss to give life to him. Michelangelo makes his characters freeze just before the hands of God and Adam touch, so that the viewers should hold their breath, awaiting for the divine spark to animate the first man. The artist describes here the future of humankind. Here is Eve nestled in the bend of God's elbow, and the child is the future Redeemer, Christ. In one scene, Michelangelo tells the story of the creation and redemption of man. In the banishment from the Garden of Eden, Michelangelo breaks with the tradition, the green biblical garden vanishes. What remains is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The artist focuses on the metamorphosis of Adam and Eve. In the paradise, they are beautiful, bright, and immortal. After the banishment, they lose the brightness and their bodies become a burden for them. The last scene shows the story of Noah. As before, the artist focuses on humankind. He dismisses the flora and fauna. In the scene of the flood, a crowd of men, women, and children are trying to escape from the waters of the flood. Solely the ark guarantees salvation. There are no animals in Noah's ark. The artist plays solely a dove, a symbol of peace. When the waters of the flood recede, Noah makes a covenant with God and then gives in to drinking. The strength Michelangelo poured into the figure of Adam is completely lost in Noah, who is overwhelmed by drunkenness and jeered at by his own sons. Michelangelo contrasts passiveness and activeness again. Noah is sleeping near prophet Zechariah, who announces merry words. "Return to me, declares the Lord Almighty, and I will return to you." Michelangelo used a dazzling palette of colors to paint Sibyllus the prophet. The nearer to the altar, the bigger and brighter the figures become, because the day when their prophecies come true is approaching. On the keystone of the chapel, to which we are led by the movement and narrative of the fresco, Michelangelo painted Prophet Jonah, who, suspended in time and space, seems to descend to the present-day chapel. Jesus calls Jonah the sign of redemption. Jonah embraces the real significance of the chapel. The death and resurrection of Jesus are the origins of the Church. In the Sistine Chapel, we stand between the past and the future. Since its creation toward the end of the 15th century, it has been a privileged place where the successor of St. Peter, Bishop of Rome, the head of the Roman Catholic Church, is elected. Over the 2,000 years of the papacy, popes have created the collections of the Vatican museums by gathering and commissioning works of art which depict the history of humankind and the story of its redemption. Today, the organization and assemblages of art are truly impressive, but the beginnings of the papacy were modest. It started with a great fire, murder of a fisherman, and Pauper's tomb located several steps from here. In Anno Domini 64, Rome was destroyed by fire. 3/3 of the city were burning. Furious Romans were planning to overthrow the Emperor Nero, who was suspected of setting the fire. However, Nero made a scapegoat of the Christian community which had recently emerged in Rome. The emperor had around 900 Christians captured and then sent them to death during the 3 days of games in his own private circus, located in the area called Tras Tibur. It was open to city inhabitants. Saint Peter, who was crucified with his head downwards and then buried in a grave dug out hastily in the Vatican Hill, became one of the first martyrs. Saint Peter's body was placed here, in this simple grave. For the Christian community, it was not an ordinary criminal executed in the circus ring, but a fisherman chosen by Christ to lead his church. Saint Peter was a prince of the apostles. A huge cemetery with rich pagan tombs arose around the humble grave. They covered the fisherman's simple grave. Meanwhile, the church kept the secret of the location of the apostles' grave with great care despite persecution. The fisherman's earthly remains were the seed from which germinated St. Peter's Basilica and blossomed the Sistine Chapel, Raphael's stands, and Vatican collections. St. Peter's tomb is under the papal altar, where every successor of St. Peter, the first bishop of Rome, celebrates the Mass. Around the dome of the tomb of the Prince of the Apostles runs an inscription composed of words which Jesus said to Peter and which define the place and the essence of the papacy. You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. St. Peter's death and the simultaneous martyrdom of St. Paul were the beginning of 250 years of persecution of Christians. Roman laws forbade them to own property and gather in public places. Nevertheless, they passed their history to posterity and cherished the memory of the burial sites of martyrs. In 313, Emperor Constantine made Christianity legal. He had 3 basilicas built: St. Peter's Basilica to protect the tomb of the Prince of the Apostles, the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls to commemorate St. Paul's tomb, and the Basilica of St. John Lateran. Around that edifice, Roman cathedral and the first official seat of popes, the history of the papacy has been formed. The churches built by Constantine occupied huge spaces, inviting pilgrims from all over the world to visit the earthly remains of martyrs. witnesses to Christ's salvic sacrifice, and to celebrate his triumph over death together with successive popes who kept the keys to paradise. The Church finally got access to the resources of the empire.
E celebrare il suo trionfo sulla morte, insieme con Paolo, che detenevano la chiave del paradiso.
The history of Christian art and architecture begun at the times of Constantine. The Roman Empire was doomed to decline and fall, but the Christian faith was to protect and save for posterity the greatest achievements of ancient art, architecture, and literature. This courtyard leads to the papal collections of ancient art gathered here since the beginning of the 16th century. The heart of the collection are the statues of Greek and Roman gods, a seemingly weird choice for the head of the Catholic Church. 200 years later, Pope Pius VI solved the inconsistency, having the architect Michelangelo Simonetti design a new entry hall leading to the rooms housing the collection. Two linked rooms telling a fascinating story. The Sala Rotunda reminds of the Pantheon, the ancient place of cult of all the gods of the Roman Empire. The large porphyry bowl probably used to be a fountain in Nero's palace, the emperor responsible for the death of Saint Peter and Paul. The niches of the room house the greatest work of the collection, marble sculptures of emperors considered gods, proclaiming the immortality of Julius Caesar, Claudius, and others.